Nigeria's electricity supply industry was privatized in 2013 pursuant to the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act 2015. While the privatization program has brought about certain benefits, the sector is still bedeviled with many challenges, the most significant of which is severe lack of liquidity. The power sector illiquidity has significantly affected progress in the value chain and impacted on the risk appetite of investors. That may wish to invest or put their monies in the various facets of the electricity value chain. Electricity generated by the generation companies flows in one direction from the gencos down the value chain, while the revenue required to pay all the market participants flows in the opposite direction. This revenue is derived from the payments made by the consumers to the distribution companies as consideration for the electricity supply by the discos. The liquidity is caused by several factors, including accumulated debt arising from unpaid invoices, poor collection by the discos, substantial technical and commercial losses that has resulted in very high aggregate technical, commercial, and collection loss. The legacy debt owed to the value chain participants by the defunct Integrated National Utility, amongst others. Accurate energy metering and billing is another challenge in some developing countries. In Nigeria, the issue of inadequate power generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure are recurrent problems coupled with inefficient energy metering, which is a major problem that results in residential energy consumers being billed unfair energy charges by the electricity distribution company for unused energy, and this has been termed crazy bills. For the energy sector to be effective, energy bills should be based on actual energy usage, and likewise, customers must pay for used energy. To achieve this, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, recommended the installation of prepaid meters for all customers. But as of today, there is no full compliance with this regulation. Power supply is grossly unreliable, and this has affected power quality due to frequent load shedding and power outages. It is in recognition of this that the Senate recently asked the federal government to consider a comprehensive review of the power privatization policy with a view to reversing the current arrangements. The Red Chamber said Nigerians would not enjoy stable power supply in the next 10 years if the activities of the distribution companies were not reviewed and restructured. Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has kicked off the next phase of a deal with Siemens AG to upgrade the nation's dilapidated power infrastructure. The government of Africa's largest economy and German engineering firm signed an agreement last June to rehabilitate and then expand the country's electricity grid. Only about 60% of the residents have access to power, and even those who do are plagued with regular blackouts. President Muhammadu Buhari has directed the power and finance ministers to commence the pre-engineering and concessionary financing aspects of the project with Siemens. Nigeria has more than 13,000 megawatts of installed electricity generation capacity, but only 7,500 megawatts of this is available, and less than 4,000 megawatts is dispatched to the grid each day. The partnership with Siemens will modernize the existing network before enlarging it until the country can produce and distribute 25,000 megawatts of power. Have the immediate past chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, Dr. Sam Amadi. He joins me via Skype from Abuja for a detailed discussion. It's great to have you, Dr. Amadi, on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's start with, before we go to the Siemens issue, which is the hot one now, but let's start with this call again to revisit issues surrounding privatization. It's been a recurrent decimal. We've heard even the richest man in Africa once talked about it, and it's coming again from the red chambers. How does this come to you?
Well, I think first we have to say that by now we should be talking about, whether we have to reverse or not. We should be thinking in terms of how to consolidate. I'm not opposed to reviewing the privatization, even the entire reform. I've always argued that we made mistakes along the line. The modeling wasn't good. We were ideological more. We're not pragmatic. We didn't factor the lessons from what has happened elsewhere. And maybe we should have shaped it in a way that we privatize slowly and to take out, gradually. But there was some kind of neoliberal ideology of extreme, what they call shock therapy. So I'm of the view that we should review. But then the review I'm looking at is a review that is done by the regulator, looking at the failings and defects and curing them through smart, evidence-based regulatory process. Now, review by political action creates risk that will further drive away investment. We had a problem in 2009 when President Yar'Adua slowed down, delayed, or reversed, if you like, the reform. And there was no investment. So I think what the parliament should do, like I've argued, is set up what we call congressional inquiry. Basically, get experts to sit and review the process, look at the policy, look at next regulatory interventions, look at federal government policies, and look at operations, and then come up with recommendations that will feed into new legislations and also feed into policy directions to regulator and policymakers like the ministry. Essentially, this sector is not working. Now, some people say it's a modeling problem. I think partly. It's also an operational problem that we're not operating it in a proper way. There are problems of implementation. So what we expect for the National Assembly is to sit together and bring the experts and consider them into a commission, not like a bureaucracy, what we call congressional commission. Their job will be to sit back, review everything, look back at the presumption of the reform. We started this reform for 16 years ago with the National Electric Power Policy. Our policy is overdue for reform, for review, so that we know whether the assumptions about how the global economy works, the assumptions about how the public and private interact, many things have changed. We now learn that we need a stronger state to drive development, unlike what we believed when we started this reform. So essentially, what the National Assembly should be doing is calling the experts and setting them up and say, go and look into what happened, not some kind of whimsical call for reversion. And that's political. And the impression we get is that, look, people want to take out this asset from those who are managing them. But are you sure that there will be people who will step in if you don't cure those risks, without coming with greater technical knowledge and the greater financial capability? So I think that at this stage, we need to have a robust discussion around, first, diagnosis, what's the problem, and then prescription, what can we do different?
Indeed.
But do not address again at this point, unless it becomes political risk.
Okay, indeed, that well taken. Most of the challenges remain the same. Liquidity, metering, and the discos are always at the receiving end. What do you also make of this, Dr. Amadi?
I think that discos claim that they are at the receiving end, and with some degree of justification, because they are those who control the revenue stream. They are the backstop, the whole value chain. And of course, the discos suffer when low power, you don't have power to sell to the consumers. So the issue of inadequacy of power, the discos are affected. Again, quality of service. If the discos are not getting their revenue, if customers are not paying, if there are losses, discos carry the empty purse. But the discos are also the problem, because the discos side of it is critical. If you have improved service, even with low energy supply, we know that we are technically not able to deliver more than 4,000 megawatts to our homes and businesses in spite of some capacity, let's say about 7,000. TCN can say they can wheel 7,000, but that's theoretical. Traditional failures occur every day. And so with that 4,000, if the discos are metering, if the efficient, investing in their network and therefore improving uptime. That means the time in which that 4,000 will be available. If they're having less losses, when rainfall comes, systems go off. If those things are happening, then the discos can collect more revenue from consumers, and then they can improve liquidity. So in a sense, discos are the victims of low liquidity, and also they're the cause of low liquidity. Of course, the GENCOs are a little bit in a better situation. If they have gas to their power plants and they're able to have more uptime, they're able to generate, and the transmission is able to evacuate to discos, then they will earn more revenue. So everybody is in trouble. If the discos can't sell more power because the system is down, and therefore they can't optimize available generation, then the TCN will instruct the generators to shut down. Generators will lose money. And then gas people, they have to take or pay. So essentially, everybody is critical. But the real driver of improvement in the disco sector, because discos improve investment and therefore they are able to serve more power, then they will incentivize these gencos to bring more power to the network. And of course, gas suppliers will be able to be paid. So it's a value chain crisis, but discos carrying the can maybe, and of course, at the same time, they are responsible for much of the system failure.
Indeed, it is a value chain thing from generation, transmission, distribution. Everybody has one or two things to grapple with. Now, Dr. Amadi, I like your comments to come on with regards to this move by President Buhari to work with Siemens to improve the sector. The Minister of Power and Finance have been ordered to go ahead with this deal. And what do you see? What do you see coming out of this? Any silver lining in this?
Sure. I think the idea of using Siemen, contracting some public-private partnership outside the discos makes sense. But then it requires two things that I have not seen play out well. And the problem of this sector and why the privatization failed largely is that government continues to treat the sector as an unregulated sector. It's a regulated sector. So whatever you're going to do, any investment in the network has to go through the regulators, relevance and prudence check. Why is it important? It's important because basically Siemens is a O&M, is an equipment producer, has experience, has competence, and then it's going to make the regulated. The discos have to play a key role. Now, the behavior of entities is they're going to be looking for profit maximization. So if you don't improve the capacity of the regulator to condition using through incentive and through sanctions to condition behavior in a particular way, then that investment in the value chain might be lost, might not be optimized. So I think the government should put NEC at the center of that transaction so that these kind of investment that Siemens will bring into the system and with the discos and the gencos and TCL largely, they will be properly regulated. The problem with having a crisis situation like we have is that government feels tempted to step institutions and then do some major, carry the load, major heavy lifting. But then the long term, we discover failure. Siemens have been here in this system. Siemens has worked with the discos. They are the equipment supplier of many of the generators and many of the discos, they supply the equipment. So they're not like new, they have been here. So this is not like a magic bullet. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not like extraordinary. This is a good transaction as long as it is embedded within an efficient, landscape, or regulatory landscape of the utilities. Everybody key in and work and then optimize value. I think beyond Siemens investment and the deal, I think the problem of this sector remains that we must sat down to review, diagnose the crisis, and then take measured, intelligent, and institutionalized processes to do with it. Look at the CBN support we have given, even when I was there as NEC chairman, and keep giving. We have a tendency to throw money at a problem. There is real crisis in the sector, and that crisis is in two forms. Crisis of modeling. Our assumptions are terrible, are wrong. They are neoliberal. They don't work. You need a strong state. You need what we call a developmental state. And you need to, kind of optimize the public sector capacity to drive efficiency from the private sector. You have to address that crisis. If you don't address that crisis, you can walk into several deals and walk out of them, and you will not solve the problem. So I think the Siemens deal is good as long as it is embedded within an efficient regulatory and policy environment landscape of this reform. So far, we're not doing that much.
Dr. Sam Amadi's immediate past chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Thank you very much for your time on the show.